welcome everybody. I believe we've got an audience. It's now just past top of the hour here in the East Coast of the United States, and thank everyone for joining. I'm Tom Ammirati, and I'm really pleased to introduce Gal Helemski. She's our co-founder, chief product officer, and chief technology officer here at PlainID, and we're excited to talk to you about the era of identity-centric security, and specifically, Gal will talk a little bit about the market and why it's so important that this is a critical topic to address in our technology world. And Gal's excited because after this presentation, she's having a family dinner of pizza, which is her favorite dish. So Gal, welcome.
Thank you.
This is Gal and myself, and thanks everyone for joining. So Gal, this topic is an important one. So from your perspective, as someone who's been in the cyber and identity space for many years, why do you think identity-centric security is so relevant today?
Yeah, I think identity-centric security is so important today to any security leader because it kind of changed the perspective on security, overall security. If in the past we were very much tied to perimeter security and then to technology-driven security, we now understand it's not sufficient. We can't look at the separate component that builds the single one problem. We need to look at the whole, which is actually the user journey. The user is accessing our technology. It goes through the different perimeters in order to access services and data, which makes the identity the single point of risk to that journey. And therefore, the perspective should shift, and it has already shifted, to look at the identity as the core component or the core element of our security. And you're presenting this slide here, and I think it resonates very well with the way business operates today. I mean, we have a business because we want to interact with users, with identities. We want to provide them with services. We want to provide them with data. We want to do that from anywhere, right? Whether they are from their office or home or on the road, we want to provide our services to all of all those identities we engage with. And that makes the identity a risk. Identity becomes the focal point of attack, and we'll see that in the coming slides as well.
Now, Gal, cybersecurity, security in general has evolved over the decades that I know both you and I have been in this space, right? I remember the days before the title CISO even existed, right? In the very, very early days of security events. And there's many companies and many technologies and many approaches to try to mitigate risk. But for our audience, they might say, Gal, we've invested in cloud security and data security and network security. What's really, really different about identity security?
Yeah. So I think this is a very relevant question because our customers are asking the same thing. It's not just the identity security which is different, the technology, but rather the perspective of how do you address your security concerns. Are you looking at each and every technology element within your stack, or are you considering the identity journey to be able to access data and services and securing that path, making sure that within that path the right security controls are in place? That's a bit of a different view to your overall security program. It ties together much, much more coherently the other security elements which you have today. It's not a replacement. It's an overall control, an overall, you might say, more complete picture to how security should be handled and should be managed.
And Gal, I know later on in this conversation, we're going to talk a bit about this concept of visibility and
Yeah.
policy management and access control or authorization. But it sounds like there's some really important data, right? That is validating why identity-centric security is so important, and specifically related to access control or unauthorized access. And for the audience, we've pulled out some statistics from a recent report, a cybersecurity report. The data has just been compiled. It was for publicly disclosed breaches in 2022. And Gal, I think we see it every day, every week, information on ransomware and phishing and malware and insider threats, but unauthorized access doesn't get a lot of publicity, but yet this data here points to almost 70% of the disclosed breaches in 2022, the root cause was associated with unauthorized breaches, including 4 out of the top 5. Any thoughts or commentary of what you're seeing in the market related to this?
Yeah, I must say that I was even amazed when I read this report. It came as a surprise, but I think it emphasized something that we already understood. Identity and the way which you protect identity and the identity journey is becoming much, much more crucial. Those numbers, those are from 2022, but they support that even to an extent, to a much larger extent. We can see the shift in the amounts of security breaches which are considered unauthorized access related between the years from 2011 to 2022. And we can see the big shift towards unprotected access related or unauthorized access related attacks. You can also see some sample, probably some of you might know some of those attacks, and the impact, this huge, significant impact of those attacks. So I believe this slide and those numbers just support the importance of the identity security and why identity should be a focus point for any security program this year, at least starting this year, if not already.
Gal, I'm going to ask you a tough question, one that I don't think I've ever asked you before, but as I hear you speaking, do you have an opinion as to why access control isn't getting more publicity, more notoriety than, say, as an example, ransomware and malware and phishing attacks, which we hear about every day? And based on the statistics, that bottom left graph, to your point, the increase of data that's out there, the increase of digital identities and the world we live in, remote working, online consumerism, everything we do seems to be digital. It would make sense that this attack surface has increased, but do you have an opinion as to why topics like ransomware, phishing, malware, insider threat gets more publicity than maintaining proper access control protocols in an organization?
Well, my guess is it's less of an understandable or easier to handle area. I mean, what do we mean by unauthorized access? It means that we have bad identity hygiene and access, right? We don't manage our identities so well, we don't manage access so well, therefore there is an unauthorized access. All credentials are being stolen. I mean, it's all contributing to the same type of attack. So I believe the understanding of what is access-based attack would grow over time and would make its lines and the importance it has tied to it.
And fully agree. And I think that sort of dovetails nicely into what we are hearing and seeing, right? So ultimately, the goal is to reduce the attack surface associated with identity as a threat vector, right? So our goal is to help stop identity-related security events. Any of these key components of customer feedback you want to call out? You started mentioning it just a little bit ago when you talked about visibility and management. So anything you want to dig down a little deeper on this slide?
Yeah, I would say that we have gathered those key customer problem statements from our current customers and prospects, and generally from the market. And there are some common themes that are being repeatedly mentioned. First, most of the customers know they have a big mess, right? They don't want us to show them just what they have in place. They want to gain actionable, prioritized insights. So we know we need to fix something, but let us know what we need to fix, how we need to fix, and prioritize that accordingly so we can take action. Taking action, changing the current state, that's a very important task from our customers. Now, the next question is how. Customers are not looking for point solution. They don't want to change one configuration which would be override by another configuration. They are looking for a more comprehensive and coherent solution. And to me, it ties very well into the policies, right? Policies, that's what they do. They provide that central kind of supervision, and they enable enforcement of business requirements, business logic, into the technology stack in a consistent and coherent way.
So I'm segueing to what you're saying to this visual around visibility, manageability, and then ultimately enforcement. So as we talk about these three components, and I think we're going to dive in a little deeper, but it really all goes hand in hand, right? You can't just do one thing. And it really is about starting with good hygiene and truly knowing your identity, if you will, knowing where that identity is coming from, what its assurance level is, and what its risk level is before you approve or grant access via policies, right? So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that, is this whole concept of managing authorization policies and why that's so important and how it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question here is how to mitigate all those identity-related breaches. Exactly like you said, Tom. There's a three-phased approach to addressing that problem. First of all, discovery. What are you discovering? Your identities, their activities. What's going on? We need to understand what's going on. And once we understand, we get some understanding of what's going on and the gaps which we need to address by seeing our identity activity. Let's start controlling, managing that by policies. Why by policies? Because it provides a more comprehensive, a complete solution and efficient way to manage all those identities and their access. So the way I see that, it's a three-phased approach, like it states here. Discover, understand what's going on, focus on areas to address, manage those access controls using well-defined policies to remediate your risk and protect your applications at scale, not one by one, and then complete that control with you might say even a deep dive into authorization with a ready-to-use payback framework. Those would be the three components that are important to mitigate identity-related breaches.
And Gal, you taught me a phrase a few years back, which I think really encapsulates what you're describing here, and so important: central policy management for standardization and normalization and simplicity of managing policies, and distributed enforcement. And is there anything you want to call out related to that term as it pertains to this topic?
Yes, for sure. So we mentioned before the a challenge that our customers are facing, and they are facing that in multiple areas. Traditional security would address that one item at a time. You might say even filling in one hole only to discover 10 others. Providing a centralized solution for policy management would enable you to do that to manage your security controls in a centralized way and enforce that consistently across the technology stack, reducing the need to chase one problem after another, setting the standard to begin with centrally, enforcing that standard across your data stack, your APIs, your applications, and so on. That's why it's so much important. The management aspect here, which is mentioned in the middle, so much important, not to direct to a localized solution, to a one-time fix, but rather to direct to an overall solution that sees your technology stack and has the ability to manage, control, and enforce across the different technologies which you have today.
Yeah, thank you, Gal. I believe we've got a slide later on. I definitely want to ask you a bit more around the concept of enforcement across that complex compute environment, because we know our marketplace, API security is a massive area and risk. Naturally, data governance, data compliance, data security in general, and compliance and governance of that data respective to appropriate laws, compliance laws and regulations, and how PlainID can help solve that, or what are the patterns, the authorization patterns that you see. I believe we have that at a future slide, and we'll dive into that. So this whole approach, as you say, begins to move us in a direction of something known as ISPM, right? And for the audience, ISPM is Identity Security Posture Management, which is synergistic with data security posture management and cloud security posture management, which are terms that have been out in our market for a few years. But Gal, as you mentioned earlier, this is an identity-centric approach, and hence this concept of ISPM. But for the audience, what in your mind truly is identity security posture, and why is it important?
Yeah. So in my opinion, identity security posture is both the who and the what, the identity and what the identity can do. It's not enough just to say there is an identity and this identity is configured to use multi-factor authentication. Also, it's important to understand what the identity can actually do. What are the entitlements or the policies that tie this identity to the data assets, to the services, to whatever the identity can do. This is truly the posture of the identity. That's why we call this identity security posture. Who the identity is, wherever it is, and how it's defined, how it's configured, in addition to what the identity can do, what the identity is actually doing, and what the definitions enable the identity to do. Only this completes the picture organizations are looking to have in regards to the identity security posture, combining the who and the what. Because remember, we started with what is identity security, and identity security speaks about the identity journey, all the way from when the identity authenticates to where it meets the data, services, applications, whatever. And that is the what, that is the identity activity. Those are the access controls of the identity that are enforced on the identity. And therefore, that is the identity security posture, the combination of the both.
So it's beginning to make more sense to me, right? We've defined that and learned and proven that identities, which have grown exponentially over the years because we live in a remote, digital, consumeristic way of life, and data has exploded over the years, and access to data, so connecting identities to data ultimately, is really what digital life is all about. And as a result, identities have become a massive attack surface for hackers, for bad people, right?
Mhm.
And over the last 3 to 5, 7 years, data security posture management or data security platforms and cloud security platforms have attempted to address that attack surface. So now it would make sense that the market needs to be focusing on how to lock down, how to secure, how to monitor the risk level or security posture associated with this latest massive attack surface, and hence identity security posture. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can add just another last note there, that consider the challenge of privileged accounts. I mean, what is a privileged account? It's a user, but it has more privileges. That's a privileged account. It's someone who's connected to a lot of authorizations, right? A lot of access controls. And therefore, the posture matters. The security posture of the identity matters, both as to who the user is, the way it defines, and it is defined and authenticated, and the set of authorizations, the set of access controls associated with that identity.
Makes complete sense. So let's talk a little bit about what really is an ISPM platform designed to deliver and do, at least at a high level. I think these concepts are straightforward, but I know you've got a lot of great insight based on market research.
Yes. Yes, so I would say the first item on the list is, first of all, provide visibility and ongoing monitoring. Identity security posture management starts with understanding your identity space and the identity related activities, what the identities are doing, where they are doing that, like the connection between the identities and the applications and assets they are asking, and providing an ongoing monitoring capability. The objective is to highlight risks from all of that information. And there's a lot of information out there, right? There is information related with the identity authentication process and access process and activity within the application. But the objective and what customers are looking to have is to highlight risk, prioritize risk events in order for them to address. And that's the first item on the list here: visibility, ongoing monitoring to track activity, identify potential issues and violations, so later on they can choose to address them.
Makes sense. You can't protect what you can't see, right? So you need to see it, you need to monitor it to at least begin the journey of protection.
Okay, so the second item then is, once we understand that there are some risks we have, we want to address them. And the way to address them are by automation and streamlining the overall efforts. Central policy management is the solution to address all those problems. We are no longer in the days where we had to pick one by one and start managing their access rights or entitlements. We already understand, the market in general understands, that cannot scale. The way to scale with your security, identity security posture, is by implementing policies. Why? Because policies, one, they represent the business logic that you want to enforce, and they provide the means to enforce that consistently across your technology stack. Central management, distributed enforcement, translating your business objectives into well-defined policies, enforcing them in your data platforms, applications, APIs, microservices, whatever, SaaS applications for sure. That's the main objective of automation and streamline. Consider a situation where you have a repository, maybe Google BigQuery, maybe a Postgres, which has a lot of data. And now you would like to create some BI reports from that data. So maybe you would be using Power BI in order to consistently make sure that you have the same set of policies in both areas. You would need to define them in both or maybe more places because, and it's the same data, right? The data is being replicated. Having a single place, central management, to define that policy only once and have it translated to both Google BigQuery, Power BI, Postgres, whatever, right? That's the way to truly get control over your identity security. Simplify the management to a single place.
As well as standardizing, right? And
Yes.
having a similar, if not an identical, approach to managing those access control policies for consistent purposes to mitigate risk is, I think that's what you're saying. Yeah, fantastic. And I think that's right? In ensuring consistency, right? I forgot that slide was coming up, right? But I think you're really saying is if you can have a consistent approach to managing, creating authorization policies, then you reduce potential security gaps and risks. I think that's pretty straightforward. I think we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but anything else you'd like to add there around consistency?
Yeah, just again to emphasize that traditional security controls are very localized by nature. And in order to really get control of all that complexity that we have in place, security leaders should consider a better way to manage that. And that calls for a policy type of solution that has the ability to central management distribute the enforcement in a consistent way. Because the data is there, multiple places, the APIs are there, the applications are there, they all serve eventually the same purpose, the ability of the identities to access all of that. And the policies should support all of that business initiative in a consistent way.
So we've talked about visibility, we've talked about automation and streamlining, and we've talked about consistency, specifically around managing, enforcing, creating access control policies. And this is a topic that's sort of adjacent, right? It might not be directly related to access control in terms of ISPM, but it is a very, very important benefit. And I think there's multiple areas here, Don. I'd love to get your opinion. Everything from data and data compliance, as well as identity governance, right? And provisioning, deprovisioning, et cetera. Thoughts around how identity security helps reduce increased levels of compliance and reduces any risk here?
Yeah. So once you have a central policy control for your identities and their access as part of your identity security posture management, that can also address your compliance and governance requirements. And let me explain. First of all, this is a very big topic for many organizations. A lot of and organizations have governance regulation requirements to govern identities and their access. Today, it is done mostly on identity per identity basis, where you govern what identities you have in place, which you should do, and also the singular assignment per identity without understanding always the business context of why this identity can access this or that piece of data. In many cases, that information is missing or non-existent. Policies change that. Policies enable you to govern and provide compliance for what you should do, for the business logic that is enforced in your technology stack, not just for singular definitions for identities, but for the actual meaning you need them to have in order to operate within that space. That's why we have this topic here, because it's extremely important. Implementing identity security posture management in the right way would provide better compliance and governance tools because of the usage of centrally managed standardized policies.
So Gal, I know you began to touch on this, and I just want to bring it up without opening up a big can of worms, so to speak. But I know both of us and our colleagues often get asked the question around, say, an IGA solution, and can an IGA solution, provide full controls over access? And it's understandable because people equate, provisioning and governance of an identity. They equate that to access, but they don't really understand the deep permutations of authorization and access control. So you might take a minute and just sort of delineate between the two there for us.
Yeah, for sure. So IGA is designed to be focused on identities, and that's good. That's what's happening. It should do that. However, you should ask yourself that if you have visibility within your IGA solution into what data your identities have access to, what services can they consume? Can they see accounts in the US, or can they see the medical records of a specific medical line or a research document or whatever, right? IGA do not are not designed to support that side of the identity equation. They only focus on identity itself. That's it. And the coarse-grained access. But they do not focus, they are not designed to focus on the capabilities of the identity, on the access, the full access of the identity. That is left within the hands of whatever technology, application, data, and so on. And therefore leading to a gap in the compliance picture. If you need to answer the question, who can see those financial records? That's a very tough question to answer. Very tough in many organizations.
And I thank you, Gal, for that. And in hearing you speak, you're reminding me about some of the items you mentioned earlier. When I think about compliance and internal audit and governance, when you talk about the security events associated with unauthorized access, you did mention earlier about least privilege. And the reality is it's not just about, when you think of compliance and this topic, it's not just about external malicious actors causing an event associated with unauthorized access. It's also people whose privileges have not been kept up to speed or up to date based on potentially changes in their role, changes in access, onboarding, offboarding, crossboarding, et cetera. So this concept of compliance and governance is both internal and external, it sounds like.
Yes, for sure.
And I think ultimately, Gal, this whole topic, the ultimate goal is to mitigate risk management. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. I think that I heard someone once mentioning that in a place where access is not provided by policies, every access is an outlier, and you don't want to have too many outliers because that creates a risk that highlights the risk that you have today. Don't focus on the outlier system. Focus on the centralized and consistent system, which is enforced by well-defined policies. And that's exactly ties to this message, to this topic. Risk management is done by creating standards, creating a central management layer that is consistent across the technology stack.
Yeah, Gal, and hearing you speak and looking at this slide, it reminds me of a past, very long time ago when I worked for a very large cybersecurity firm. And in speaking with a lot of professional security practitioners, they'd always say things like, it's not a matter of if, but when there's a security event, and really good security hygiene is not just one thing, but it's a holistic approach from, as we see today, more internal hygiene, right? As consumers, as employees in a workforce, security starts with each individual. But I wrap this around in this whole topic because when I think about holistic risk management for an enterprise, data security, cloud security, and now identity security, it all has to be done to really take your holistic level of risk management and prevention to an optimal level. And I think that's really what we're beginning to point out in hearing you speak. So Gal, I want to transition, and for the audience transition, we've talked about the market, and now we want to give you a little bit of flavor of how PlainID is addressing this topic of identity security broadly, and specifically the ISPM platform. And for those of you on the phone who are familiar with PlainID, we spent the last 7 years getting this subspace known as authorization or access control right. We started with trying to solve arguably addressing the most challenging problem associated with access control, and that is dynamic authorization, contextual risk-based authorization in real time. We are proud to say that we are the leading independent provider of authorization in the world. We serve over 6 customers in over 6 continents and over 26 countries with tens of millions of identities that we are protecting and hundreds of millions of authorization transactions in a day. But it's not just about authorization or enforcement. That's a piece of it. In our belief, the ISPM platform, as Gal talked about, starts with visibility, discoverability, management, and authorization. I'm going to ask Gal to take us through, but at a high level, our solution names are Identity Insights for discoverability and visibility, what Gal spoke about of you need to know your customer and have visibility into know your identity and understand what that identity assurance level is and what it's doing. Be able to manage policies specifically for large SaaS applications, be able to manage and standardize in a centralized way those policies for these large applications that have innumerous amounts of petabytes of data and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users and transactions. And then lastly, manage the enforcement in real time. So Gal, if you could take us through these modules as you see it, as Chief Technology Product Officer, co-founder, this is your vision. We're excited to launch these solutions this year. So please take us through, starting with Discover or Identity Insights.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. So we have, as Tom mentioned, we have chosen to expand our offering in order to support the complete user journey within the organization's technology stack. And it starts with Discover. We call this product module Identity Insights. This product module is designed to support the visibility of identity-related activity and highlighting the vulnerabilities and risk related from that activity. Okay, so, and this is obviously an ongoing monitoring process. The objective is to show what's going on and to show what's going on in a prioritized and actionable way, not just let you see all of the information which that is there. We are starting our support with Microsoft, Entra ID, Okta, and Ping Identity, and you can expect that to grow as we move forward with our solution.
Fantastic. So it starts with discovery and knowing one's identity and those assurance levels to start the protection, if you will, outside the front door, right? As the identity's getting in. And Gal, this is for workforce, partners, supply chain. Is that fair to say as well? And customers? Is that all accurate?
So any identity. That's accurate. Like you said, any identity that is accessing information, services, in your enterprise technology stack is an identity, whether it's a consumer, a partner, an employee, even a machine account. We need to know what's going on. You need to know what's going on in order to be able to address the risks that are there. There are many identities which are not employee identities that poses a risk. There are third parties that have maybe broader access than they should have to your services and data. That needs to be highlighted and provide you the ability to mitigate that risk.
It's a really important point for the audience. There's a lot of data. Firms like IDSA, Identity Defined Security Alliance, has some great data and content around one of the largest security risks associated with identity-based attacks. Gal mentioned it, it's third parties, it's the supply chain. Many of the major breaches over the years occurred from an external third party accessing its vendors' systems. They need to access those applications to do business with that vendor or that manufacturer, but they are third party. So Gal mentioned support for partnerships or third party supply chain identities. It's a big risk vector. We talked about workforce identities, employees. And again, that could be unauthorized access, could be account being hijacked or taken over, or it could be, as Gal mentioned earlier, just privileged access, least privileged access. Maybe their account was shifted or changed, their access, their role changed, but their access to certain data or applications wasn't updated and adjusted. And that's lack of governance, out of compliance, ultimately a potential risk. Gal, the next module that I know you and I are passionate about because it really addresses a problem both for manageability as well as security is what we call SaaS authorization management. For the tech folks on the line, policy orchestration, specifically access control or authorization policy orchestration. So Gal, I know this has been your brainchild. We have a couple of very, very large new customers that we're super proud of that are embarking on this journey with us for this new module.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm excited about this model because first of all, what I see in the market is that a growing number of vendors have more complex, fine-grained, even dynamic authorization mechanisms they support. However, obviously each has its own method and its own interface and its own way to do that. And that's where the gap is, the management, the consistent management and the standardized management of all of that complexity. Consider your Power BI. SaaS application that feeds from data that is originated in Google BigQuery or Snowflake or maybe some of the other repositories you have in place. You need to manage authorization policies within Power BI and then within Snowflake and within Google BigQuery and within the applications that support them. That is very, very distributed. For sure, it's not consistent, and that's where we come in. We now have a unified standard interface to manage all that complexity in a single language, the language which you are familiar with from our solution, one graphical and policy as code language to manage your Power BI policies, Snowflake policies, Google BigQuery, and you can even see Zscaler in because that's what our customers are asking us. We will expand this module as we move forward for sure. The objective is back again to central management, distributed enforcement. One place where you manage your policies, one place where you govern your policies and provide compliance for those controls, and have us translate, distribute, make sure they are enforced in a consistent way across the technology stack.
Gal, two quick questions here. First one is, does it impact the functionality or user experience of any of these applications?
No, absolutely it does not. We work together with the built-in security mechanism of each and one of those vendors. We work with their APIs, we work with their standards in order to provide that overall policy control.
Thank you. And Gal, second question. I know we call these in our marketing terms authorizers, our SaaS authorizers that provide orchestration or manageability of these policies for these technologies. But my second question is, so Gal, why did you choose these 4 technologies, these authorizers for these 4 applications to start? What was your thought process in starting with Power BI, Zscaler, Google, BigQuery, and Snowflake?
Market demand and market coverage. That's what we should typically lead us. But we got very specific requests from customers. Actually, we have customers already using some of those, and that's what we will continue doing. We would continue listening to the market and see what's the demand there, what customers are looking to solve, and we'll help them address that.
And I think it makes a ton of sense because they're all market leaders in their space. There's a massive element of data protection, which we know is super high priority in the market right now, is protecting data for compliance and governance and security. And there's tons and tons of identities that are accessing so much data associated with these applications. And in many cases with Zscaler, there's a zero trust component, which I know one of our customers is leveraging PlainID as part of that reference architecture. So Gal, we're close to the end here. Dynamic authorization service, we talked a bit about this. It's our roots. It's what we do. We're the market leader in it. We're proud to say that. And it's really based on policy-based access control. And as you can see on the bottom for the audience, we've got PlainID authorizers or integrations for a number of technologies across this computing environment, including APIs and microservices and IDPs and governance tools. Gal, what's important for us to leave the audience with surrounding our core Auth-Z service?
Well, first of all, it's ready to use. It's a ready-to-use PBAC service. Many organizations have developed over the years multiple solutions for supporting their numerous requirements for authorizations. That's an off-the-shelf, ready-to-use service, which has a very wide technology coverage in both enforcement capabilities and identity information capabilities. We have been investing the last several years in this solution. That's what the majority of our customers are currently using, many of them in production, and we are continuing our ongoing support and enhancement to this service. Additionally, it ties very well into the platform. The fact is, many organizations have both homegrown applications and SaaS applications. You don't want to split the control of those authorizations between different solutions. Our solution, our platform, provides a one single place, unified way to manage authorization policies for your overall technology stack. We are not just saying that. You can see, in fact, the list of technologies which we support today. Again, I can share that example where an organization is using, let's pick up Postgres to store the majority of its data, but then for BI reports, the data needs to be replicated to Power BI or some other tool. You can't use just one method to manage both BI tools, databases, and for sure microservices, APIs, and so on. That's why PlainID is providing the notion of central management, whether it's for your homegrown applications, for SaaS applications, and distributed enforcement, which is a fitted solution to control authorizations at the relevant technology.
And Gal, many of our customers, both current and those evaluating our platform, are looking to modernize off of legacy entitlement engines or legacy authorization engines. And this is the core of it. And in many cases, they might start with migrating off of a homegrown application, but then they really are enamored with our SaaS authorization management, our policy orchestration functionality. So it really provides a building block and a scalable platform and building block to achieve both solving point challenges, right, or use cases that might be, small, but then fitting that broader picture of achieving a mature, comprehensive identity security posture.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Gal, as we close and open it up for questions, any last thoughts with respect to, this topic, right? The era of identity security truly is here, as we discussed, and we've built our platform by achieving the tough, what I believe is the hardest thing, which is authorization, dynamic authorization, contextual authorization in real time, and now extending that to, as you discussed, manageability, policy orchestration, and discoverability or visibility via identity insights. Before we open up for any questions, any last thoughts or words on this?
Just that I do encourage anyone who's listening or would listen later, anyone in the security space, to truly understand what identity security is. Focus your security design around the identity and the identity journey throughout the full technology stack, and consider the right solutions to address that journey, both from the identity perspective and the access of that identity perspective.
Yeah, I think that's great, Gal, because as we've seen this massive convergence over the last 5 years, 5 to 7 years, between security and identity, and now data and identity, and hence security. So it's all converging. In our professional careers, we've seen, CISOs, the topic or the title of CISO be created, the emergence and the importance of identity and access management, and all the folks that manage IAM, and obviously IGA and PAM as well. And now it's all coming together. And this problem is only, I think, going to, this risk and this challenge is only going to get more profound, because that's what history has taught us, right? Especially with security risks, challenges, gaps, attack surfaces, and then solutions that try to address this. And I think, we're also seeing it in the market with firms that might have been a security firm acquiring identity companies or building identity solutions, and vice versa, right? So, yes. Gal, it's always a pleasure, to present with you. And thank you to the audience. Do we have any questions? I think, Tara, we're going to Slack. I think, do we have any questions from the audience?
I see here just a few. So one question is, can policy management support SaaS applications? I think this is a good question, and obviously it depends on the SaaS application, but the fact is we see a large number of SaaS applications that include policy support. So this would be a chicken and an egg type of story, but again, we see the technology advance towards that. PlainID is there to support any application that has a a policy management capability, and obviously a market demand to support it. So, yeah. The second, another question here, I think we covered that, but anyway, I'll share that. When we speak about identity-centric security, which user types do we include? Is it both internal or external? So the answer is, both. We cover any identity, whether internal, external partners, even system accounts, all are included. They are all identities, and they should all be considered as part of the identity security posture management. I believe, Tom, you mentioned third parties as the main risk vector that we see today in many of the identity-based attacks. So obviously they should be included. There are more questions here. I'm not sure we have the time, but I do encourage you to reach out to us, ask your questions. We're happy to share more specifics, including a demo, and see if we can address any of your identity security needs. We are here.
Gal, thank you again. As I said, always great to present and speak with you. Thank you to the audience for sure for joining and taking the time. And lastly, Gal, enjoy your evening in Israel. Enjoy your family time.
Thank you.
And I'm envious of the pizza that you're going to eat. So well wishes to you, and thanks everyone for joining today. Have a great rest of the day wherever you might be across the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Gal. Bye now.
Bye.